and also an inductee. Rita Unduke, and also an inductee for the recent...
The Compliance Institute of Nigeria has come of age. This is the 9th year having kick-started 20. What you are doing. You must know the rules and the regulation. You must know the best practice. You must know the international standards. You must also begin to handle people management skills.
The next set of people also that I'm going to be conferring by this time next year, hopefully, the Associate Compliance Institute of Nigeria will be a recognized international certification pari passu with the CCCP certification of the International Federation of Compliance Associations.
So the work that the Compliance Institute of Nigeria is doing is really commendable. We're at a pace where payments are moving fast, risks are evolving, and it is important that we keep abreast with those new risks and make sure that we understand how our ecosystem will need to change and evolve, and how, as compliance practitioners, we continue to adapt to those changes.
So congratulations to all of you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, dear inductees, you would agree with me that every induction year, it gives us something to celebrate.
Today is another milestone in the journey of the Compliance Institute Nigeria. We started about 10 years ago. And if you look back at where we started from and where we are today, it's been an incredible journey during that time. Right now, we are now at a level where we need to then plan for the next phase of growth for the Institute over the next 10 years. So we are working towards a number of things. We are working with international partners like ACANS, International Federation of Compliance Associations, and other international bodies to leverage on the benefits we've gained over the last few years. We're looking at the next 10 years where the Institute becomes an international platform for compliance professionals, not just in Nigeria, but across the globe. So hopefully, this sets the tone for compliance.
Because we believe that sustainable anti-corruption efforts require collaboration, capacity building, and the continuous elevation of professional standards. For inductees and to the seasoned leaders, we can be waiting for what's next. We are about strategic shifts we must embrace to thrive in this new era. Rule taking. So we must move from rule taking to rule shaping. So we must be shaping, deciding what the rule will be.
I advise everybody that whatever thing you're doing, be it certification you're writing, be it your growth, be it your career word, don't always see failure as an identity. Instead, see it as organized by the Compliance Institute Nigeria. I must say I am really elated to be here today, and I am proud of myself for achieving this milestone. I must say thank you to the Compliance Institute Nigeria for taking it upon themselves to shape the future.
At CIN, we are empowering compliance professionals. Come and join us. So good evening, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on what region or where you are logging in from. Like I said, come and join us. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. And if you can hear me, can I see some reactions online to show you can hear me loud and clear and we can go on today? Let's show some love. Thank you. Thank you. I can see those reactions coming in online. And I think today's webinar is going to be something extremely interesting. And tell your colleagues to log on so that we can all have a very meaningful discussion. So good afternoon. I'll say distinguished colleagues, compliance professionals joining from around the world. I'll start with a very small, just a simple picture. A customer in Lagos sends money. Lagos in Nigeria. And within seconds, It moves through systems in London, clears through infrastructures in Europe, and lands in an account somewhere in Asia. This transaction I've just described takes just a second, but definitely we have compliance questions it raises. We have multiple jurisdictions, we have multiple regulations, and we have multiple risks. To me, that's actually the reality of the borderless financial system we operate in today. And one of those realities in today's financial system is this payment now, is how payment now moves across borders in seconds. But I would say, and that's why we are talking about it today, the risk actually moves just as fast. So on behalf of the Compliance Institute Nigeria, it's my pleasure to actually welcome you all to our CIN bi-weekly webinar series. This particular edition is hosted in collaboration with the International Federation of Compliance Association, IFCA. I'll leave our moderator to tell us more about IFCA. But at this point, it's important we understand that Compliance Institute Nigeria is a major player in IFCA. And this platform, this webinar series we are collaborating on, was created actually to strengthen capacity within the compliance ecosystem and also to help us connect globally around all the various risks we are looking at. Today's topic is simple: global payments, compliance in a borderless economy, emerging risk, and regulatory convergence. And the topic, I would say, is very timely. And I must not forget to add, we are in the month of March, when all over the world we celebrate International Women's Day. Therefore, CIN deliberately has chosen to spotlight two exceptional women in compliance leadership. One will be moderating the conversation, and the other, the speaker, will be giving us deep insights. So I'll say it's my pleasure to welcome our moderator as we celebrate International Women's Day and talk about compliance and admire the role of women in compliance. It's my pleasure to welcome Denica Pilar, an accomplished compliance professional. She is the head of compliance and AML, money laundering apps, whose experience in financial crime, compliance, and regulatory governance actually makes her well-placed to guide today's discussion. We are also very honored to have with us our speaker, Aram Shea, who is the Senior Director, Regional Ethics and Compliance for Sub-Saharan Africa at Visa. She will definitely be sharing valuable insights from the front line of global payment compliance. We have her joining us from, she'll tell us. And Denica, I'm handing over to you, all the way in South Africa. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you kindly for that amazing introduction, and happy International Women's Day to all the women and all the participants online. To have an amazing CEO at the head of the Compliance Institute Nigeria, an amazing woman at the head, as well as another amazing woman at the head of IFCA, I'm truly honored to be in your presence. And with that, guests, I would like to say good evening, welcome to our colleagues and our fellow compliance professionals, as well as the visitors that are not in the compliance space. I hope you can take away how important compliance is and the role of compliance is in financial systems and financial ecosystems from this discussion. On behalf of the International Federation of Compliance Associations, in partnership with the Compliance Institute, it is honestly a privilege to be here and to moderate this discussion. Just a very quick background on me. My name is Denica Pilar. I am a financial regulatory and compliance specialist. I work in a number of fintechs as a consultant, most notably BankX, which is a financial software service provider, PumpPay, which is an alternate fuel payment solution, as well as Cyberment, which is a financial technology think tank, and most importantly, with the Compliance Institute of Southern Africa as part of their anti-money laundering compliance practitioner designation and the working group that enables that designation in South Africa and Southern Africa. My work really is focused around compliance leadership across the financial services, with particular emphasis on AML. And when we talk about anti-money laundering and anti-money laundering controls, payments and AML go hand in hand. You cannot do the role of money laundering and money laundering control and detection if you do not follow the money. And if you do not understand payments, you cannot follow the money. So for those of you that may not be familiar with IFCA, IFCA is the International Federation of Compliance Associations, of which the Compliance Institute Nigeria is a member, as well as the Compliance Institute of Southern Africa. Being able to shape the global space in terms of compliance principles and methodology is incredibly valuable for us in terms of credibility of the roles that we bring and the value we bring to the table in these regulated environments. The purpose really is to strengthen the compliance profession internationally through collaboration, leadership, professional development, and the advancement of high standards of integrity and practice across the industry. Currently, IFCA is working towards an international AML designation that would be recognized internationally, that takes into consideration not just methodology, logical processes, but are also practical learnings and understandings that is recognized in that designation. Okay. So let's talk about tonight's topic. So at the time when financial crime risk is becoming more complex, and to be honest, sometimes it is a bit scary to turn on the news and see what's happening, but we know how the modus operates in terms of criminal activity. We've seen an increase in cross-border transactions. We understand illicit financial flows is one of the greatest risks the country faces in terms of financial crime risks. And that, coupled with technology-driven capabilities, the risk is increasing exponentially. I want to make a quick mention of the IFCA and CISA conference. That will be the hybrid summit that will be held on the 17th of April. I know the link will be shared with you. It is a hybrid summit, so you can dial in or you can attend in person. I would highly recommend that there's participation in the summit. There's going to be a lot of discussions in terms of regulatory developments locally in the regions, as well as adhering to global trends and global direction in terms of regulatory development. We're going to have important speakers from regulators. So you can hear firsthand from your supervisory bodies in terms of what the expectations, regulatory developments are going to be. I know Bao's already done an introduction. Bao, I just want to reach out to you one more time as a very important partner with IFCA on this. If there's any other notices or information that you would like to share from the Compliance Institute Nigeria and the important role you continue to play in advancing the compliance profession and supporting practitioner development. Bao?
I will take that after the conversation to give us time to dive in, if you don't mind.
No problem. All right, so then turning back to this evening's discussion and the topic before us, it is timely and highly relevant. Now, I've said this a few times, and I'll be saying it for the first time to you as an audience. What is happening in today's day and age, payments is really going to reshape the global order. So this is an incredibly important discussion. Pace of innovation in digital payments continues to accelerate at a rate at which we as an industry, as well as a regulated supervisory industry, cannot keep up with it. While the expectations are evolving just as quickly in an increased, integrated and borderless financial ecosystem, compliance can no longer be reactive. And we understand this in the AML space better than anywhere else, I would think. Once it is reactive, it is too late. You cannot put preventative measures in place. It must be forward-thinking, it must be agile, must be capable of being able to adapt and pivot to the risks that are emerging. And that brings us to today's topic. And we've already had an introduction to Aram, but I have to tell you how honored I am to be in your presence. Aram Say is a highly respected compliance and financial crime risk leader with more than 15 years of leadership experience. Now, I know she doesn't look it, but it's verifiable. She's been in this industry for well over more than 2 decades. She has extensive experience in global payments, banking, professional services. She currently serves as the Director of and Regional Head of Ethics and Compliance for Sub-Saharan Africa for Visa. She provides strategic oversight across one of the most dynamic financial ecosystems in the world. We know how complex and the risks associated with card. Before that, Aram had a very impressive career across North American financial services, including the National Bank of Canada, where she advanced through AML and compliance leadership roles, focused on international trade, transactions, sanctions, cross-border regulatory risk. She also worked for Ernst & Young, providing advisory and strengthening compliance frameworks and controls. She is widely respected in her expertise for AML and CFT. I cannot wait to hear her insights in respect of this topic and the risks that are emerging. It is an honor, and thank you for joining us, Aram. And with that, it's a privilege to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Tenika. Thank you, Bao, and everyone from the Compliance Institute of Nigeria. It's a true pleasure and honor to be here. I hope you are able to hear me well. Allow me to start sharing my screen, and hopefully I don't break the internet by doing so, and that you are able to see the screen. Danica, can you just confirm that you see? All right, excellent. So again, good afternoon, everyone.
We can see it. Yes, you can put it into presentation mode.
It is in presentation mode.
We're still seeing it in PowerPoint.
You might need to reshare and share the presentation.
Or switch screens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me stop sharing. Okay, please confirm if you
it's
see.
In presentation mode. Perfect.
All good now?
Perfect, yes, it is. It's in presentation mode.
Excellent. Thank you for confirming, Danica. Again, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Again, thank you, Bao and the Compliance Institute of Nigeria for organizing this important conversation. It's always a pleasure to speak with such distinguished audience of compliance, risk, and governance professionals. Bao, you've mentioned it, today's topic, global payment in this borderless economy, is particularly relevant for our continent, but also for Nigeria. And the broader African market continue to integrate more and more deeply into the global payment. So I'll be speaking from my experience as head of compliance for our sub-Saharan market at Visa, but also from working in banking and advisory roles in other parts of the world. Again, this presentation is presented to you as is, and you will understand that it does not constitute any legal advice. So for today, what I want to cover, and let me briefly outline how we'll spend about the next 30 to 45 minutes. First, I'll set the context for why global payment compliance has become such a critical issue today. We'll then look at the different risks, right, in cross-border payment in the ecosystem. How are the regulators also responding through increased convergence? We'll look from there, walk through of real-world scenarios, and actually, as we progress in the conversation and on this presentation, you will see different case studies as well to draw from global experience that really illustrate where institutions often struggle and what lessons can be applied today. And then I'll close on by practical strategy and key takeaways that I hope you can take back into your organization. So without further ado, let me here. So cross-border payments are growing at an unprecedented scale. We estimate in 2022 that the market was valued at over 180 trillion in 2022, and this amount is expected to double by the time we reach 2032. And driven largely global e-commerce and real-time payments. Bawo gave the example of a payment that will impact Nigeria, cross to Europe, to the US, and terminate in an account in Asia. So what's important here is not just the size of the market, but the speed and the complexity of these flows, right? Transactions are increasingly instant, digital, across multiple jurisdictions. And often with that, the trade-off is that it compresses the time available for the controls, or it may increase exposure to fin crime, sanctions, and consumer risk. So what this means, although from a business perspective, it looks great, but for a compliance perspective, it means that this growth means a traditional, slower control framework are no longer sufficient. The time where you can leave a wire transfer for 24 to 40 hours under your queue for review is over, right? It means that cross-border, they become real-time. Compliance must also become faster, smarter, and more integrated in the payment lifecycle. In today's world, I think we can recognize the impact of emerging technology. Cryptocurrencies have become a popular mean of transaction due to their anonymous nature, which you can provide a level of obscurity for users. And often, unfortunately, this feature is exploited by money launderers, who then will take advantage of gaps in regulatory framework. And so the lack of, in some jurisdiction, stringent regulation, or the fact that those transactions can be anonymous, will make it challenging for the authorities, but also for compliant professionals to trace and curb illegal activities. I think we all face it now. The evolution of social media and online marketplaces has significantly altered the landscape of financial transaction. Who would have think that 5 years or 10 years ago, you can do your shopping all in TikTok, right? And so these platforms offer a high degree of anonymity. They enable user to conduct high volume transaction, but it also means that it will attract both legitimate volumes, but it could also attract illicit activities. When we speak about crowdfunding platform, it have become a very popular method to raise funds quickly. However, again, this can be misused and exploited by criminals, right? And so it's important as compliance and risk practitioners that we take all those product features in account and ensure that we have the appropriate controls to ring fence those activities. And finally, in terms of money mules, it's a topic that we hear, buzzword that we hear more and more, where money mules, they act as intermediaries, and they provide a buffer between the launderer from one end and then the final destination of those funds. And this brings an additional layer, make it harder to link the money back to the criminal origins. So again, it's an emerging typology. They will try to avoid detection by having multiple individuals, sometimes transferring smaller amounts, and sometimes criminals are often targeting individuals who are financially vulnerable or naive, making it easier to recruit them and act as money mules. And so this is another emerging technology, typology, that we must take into account as our compliance program evolves with time. So why is this topic important and why does it matter now? We said it, right? Payments today are fundamentally different from what it used to be even 5 or 10 years ago. They're faster, they're more digital, borderless, and a single transaction will touch multiple jurisdictions. And however, while technology has advanced rapidly, regulatory expectations have not stood still. They have also intensified. And I think from where I sit here in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, or even in Lagos or in Johannesburg, we can all feel it, right? Globally, regulators are responding to rising concern around illicit financial flow, on sanction evasion, digital fraud. And it's no different for Nigeria, right? The financial system becomes more interconnected. And this means we are increasingly exposed to global risk. And so compliance obligations are expanding as well. They're expanding fast. And they're no longer only focused on local, right? The domestic risk is one thing, but they also see how is this connected to the global financial institution and financial system. And the key message here is very simple. Compliance can no longer be designed purely from a domestic lens. We need to take into account our counterpart globally. So here, this slide really illustrates how rapidly the payment facilitator or PayFac model is scaling globally. We see from 2019 to 2025, PayFac gross payment volumes have increased more than fourfold. And so this growth rate is significantly higher than overall e-com growth, and it tells us something important. PayFac are not just riding the digital commerce wave, they're actively reshaping how payments are acquired and managed. And so what does this mean from a compliance perspective? It means that PayFacs sit closer to merchants, they onboard at scale, they often operate across multiple jurisdictions, and with speed and automation, which are the core of their value proposition, it means that it's the same speed that can create real risk if governance, onboarding controls, or monitoring framework do not scale at the same time. We see it in CEMEA for Visa. CEMEA means Central Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We see this growth accelerating with 8 to 10 new payment facilitator registration every month, and over 300 payment facilitator registered to date, and amongst those, 75% of them have entered the payment in the payment industry in the past 2 years. And so this means that a weakness at one point can expose the entire ecosystem, right? Including Nigerian banks, international financial institutions. Risk is shared. It's no longer isolated. So modern payments are highly interconnected. From a regulatory compliance standpoint, accountability has to be shared, right? And this also aligns with the CBN increasing focus on end-to-end oversight across participants. We can no longer shield and say, I'm only responsible for this part of the process. I don't see what's happening elsewhere. No, we are also accountable, right? And this is one of the most important shifts in payment is the complexity of the ecosystem today, right? Today, we just said it, we have payment facilitators, we have banks, fintechs, network operator, merchants, platform operators, third-party PSP service provider, and we each play a role and we may each introduce risks. And so it means that it's a shared accountability to ensure that collectively we ensure the safeness of our ecosystem. So now let's talk about the risks that are most top of mind from a regulatory globally. Obviously, AML, CFT remains a central topic. We are seeing increased focus on trade-based money laundering, on indirect relationship, nested payment and correspondent activity as well. We see sanction risk has become more and more dynamic, without even mentioning what's happening currently in the Middle East and the geopolitics around it, right? It's become more dynamic. Sanction lists evolve quickly. I think the OFAC list sometimes is updated 3 to 4 times in a single day. And so exposure can be often indirect, often through affiliates, counterparty, merchants, rather than a direct relationship. So this means we need to ensure that we have all those bases also covered in our processes. Third, digital fraud has surged. Social engineering and account takeover fraud now account for a significant financial losses and regulatory attention. And there's always that link between fraud and compliance, right? And finally, in terms of data protection and cyber resilience, they are increasingly inseparable from compliance. So financial crime today has a bigger umbrella than what it may have been 10 to 15 years ago, right? And because of how all these risks converge. And in Nigeria, obviously, through agencies like NFIU, sorry, I think we had a participant that unmuted. Danica, I'm not sure if it's for a question or it was just a mistake.
I think it was a mistake. Make sure they mute.
Excellent, thank you. So I was just saying, obviously in Nigeria with NFIU, with CBN, it all aligns closely with FATF and the international standard. But also compliance program must still reflect Nigerian legal ethics and supervisory realities. So this graph here really highlights a trend that is no longer theoretical, right? We're just mentioning cybercrime and how it is accelerating rapidly and expected, unfortunately, to continue to rise, right? So while payment is becoming more and more interconnected, criminals are also scaling just as fast as technology allow them, just as fast as social engineering is more prevalent with the cross-border network to really exploit speed and its complexity. So what's important here is that cybercrime is no longer just an IT issue. It has direct implication for financial crime, for consumer trust, and for institutional resilience. And I want to go over my first case study for today. All right, so let me bring life to this scenario. We have a fast-growing payment facilitator who's expanding rapidly across multiple markets. They're trying to streamline merchant onboarding to support growth, but due diligence is rather light, right? Monitoring is not necessarily applied consistently, and accountability between the fintech and the sponsor bank, the acquirer, is a little unclear. And so eventually, a few red flag or high risk will emerge. I'd like to first, before we go through the red flags, see if you can put in the chat, based on the context that has been provided, what type of red flags would you see? Perhaps if we take 10 seconds, Danica, if you can read some of the comments that participants will put in the chat based on what's provided. Yes.
So while everyone's joining in on what they think the red flags are, I'll just add, the onboarding process was highly automated. We come from the school of thought that if you can't see the customer in front of you, there is an increased risk of misrepresentation.
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's always a matter of finding that right balance, right? What can you automate? What will remain manual? And whatever is automated, how do you ensure that you have a proper oversight? So not sure if we have some comments, perhaps.
Yes, we do.
Chat today. Right.
So from the chat, it says EDD not being consistent, weak CDD, inconsistent application of the EDD, identity theft is also possible, unclear delineation of compliance responsibilities, Yeah, that seems to be the check. And then somebody also highlighted the automation, uncleared provision of KYC, unclear compliance responsibilities.
Yeah. Now, this is great. And I think, folks on the call really identified the major risk that we see here, right? Where you scale at onboarding merchants rapidly, high risk or prohibited merchant may enter in the ecosystem, right? And then it becomes not just a focus on the fintech, but also on the bank and on the broader payment ecosystem, right? I think we've mentioned the onboarding process, the due diligence, but then once you onboard the merchants, if on top of having a light KYC or KYM, know your merchant, you do very limited monitoring, you will not spot any post-onboarding suspicious activity, right? And so the lesson here is that speed without governance creates systemic risk. And regulators increasingly expect financial institution acquirers to demonstrate the active oversight they have and not just a passive reliance, right? It's not just a question of, as per the agreement between the financial institution and the fintech is responsible for XYZ, but as the financial institution, the acquirer, what type of oversight has been put in place, right? And so, and it's also a matter of not only focusing on the payment facilitator control failure, but also on the bank's lack of effective oversight. And so moving on to, it brings us to regulatory convergence. And here, this slide really highlights an important reality for institution operating today, right? Global standard apply, FATF recommendations will continue, but accountability is local, right? So global FATF standards provide that foundation for ML and CFT framework. But Nigeria also has aligned strongly with these standards through the CBN regulation, to the BOFIA, to NFIU oversight. Whether it's in Nigeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, in South Africa, we all have our own priorities, whether it is ethics, foreign exchange management, whether it's consumer protection or financial stability. The result is that the regulatory environment will reflect global expectation, but also take into consideration local nuance. So for institutions that operate cross-border, the challenge is really how do you balance those global standards and that domestic compliance obligation. And I also note that recent development in the CBN March 2026 baseline standard for automated AML solution. I saw it actually yesterday as I was preparing for this webinar. It's a clear signal that automation is now expected, but it must be well governed, right? Risk-based and explainable. And it really reinforces the supervisory shift that we continue to see globally. And so let's look at a second case study here. Speaking of digital fraud and consumer trust. So in many markets, including Nigeria, social engineering scams have increased dramatically. Customer are tricked into authorizing payments, and then dispute may follow. So here we have a digital payment adoption led to a rise of authorized push payment fraud, where customers were socially engineered into initiating legitimate-looking transactions to fraudster. So while those transactions were technically authorized by customer, complaint volumes or dispute volumes increased significantly, attracting regulator and media attention. And so it's here, red flags, that spike in consumer complaint, that spike in fraud or dispute rate, repeat transaction for newly created or unfamiliar beneficiary with weak customer education around those fraud typologies really increase the risk. And regulators are viewing this issue not only as a fraud concern, but also as a consumer protection and a governance failure. So institutions are expected to demonstrate proactive fraud prevention measures, fair customer treatment, and clear accountability. And so in hindsight, it also means that digital fraud is not solely a technology issue, not just for your IT team, but as risk and compliance practitioner, it's a trust, it's a governance and regulatory compliance issue that really requires proactive intervention. Once trust is lost, it's very difficult to rebuild. So fraud risk must also be a compliance issue. And more you will see institutions that are working in tandem, risk and compliance together, because we may look at the same issue from a different lens and can benefit from one another. And so what regulators expect today, right? There you go. Across jurisdictions, what we see is that regulators are sometimes asking similar questions, right? They want to see strong governance. They want to see clear accountability and evidence that senior management understand the risk that is being taken. They expect effective third-party oversight. We discussed this, payment facilitators and whatnot, and monitoring system that can be explained, right? Not simply operated. And so more and more, they want institutions to articulate the why certain risks are acceptable and how controls will mitigate them. And it really reflects a clear shift that we're seeing across jurisdictions. Regulators are moving well beyond just policies and checklists and procedures, right? Tone at the top becomes also critical here. Third-party oversight remains as a top priority and a central supervisory team, right? Whenever you outsource with partners or platform, it's good that you utilize a third-party vendor, but you must explain how this solution fit your organization and not just that plain vanilla approach that has been taken. I've said it and I'll repeat it again, explainable transaction monitoring. So nowadays, they're not just interested on, do you have a system? What's the name of the system? But as a financial institution or bank or whatnot, is to explain how does it work? Why are we setting thresholds for alerts at 80, 72, 75%? And why does 80% to 75% make sense for my financial institution, right? And finally, as we said, in the evidence of decision-making, right? How were risks approved or accepted? Was there any alternative that were considered? And how do we deem those controls adequate? And as you move along, and even your good ERM process or framework will highlight it, when issues arise, regulator will look for a clear audit trail that shows that informed judgment and decision-making, and not just a hindsight rationalization on a business activity, right? So in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that compliance is no longer a static checklist exercise, right? It is evaluated as a set of deliberate risk-based decisions, right? So we want to more and more understand whether control actually work in practice and not just if they exist on paper, right? And so the underlying message is consistent across all markets, and this also includes Nigeria. Effective compliance is really demonstrated by thorough actions, decisions, and governance. So moving on to a third and final case study on sanctions and correspondent banking. We have here a bank that processes US dollar transaction through a correspondent bank. A counterparty affiliate becomes sanctioned, triggering automated block at the correspondent bank level. Because of that, transactions are halted, liquidity is impacted, and reputational question may arise. So again here, if you can put on the chart, what type of risks would you see from such a scenario? What type of mitigation measure, if you were the compliance officer at this institution, would you have put in place? Or how would you react to having a newly sanctioned party on a live transaction? So Danica, I'm going again to lean on you for comments from our participants in the chat.
I'm ready. While they putting that information in, it's been incredibly insightful so far. So thank you, Aram, for that. On this case study, the risk I think is always of the unknown afterwards. So if you do screening at onboarding, you assume the risk is removed, which is not the case. So that is what I would say is the red flag. Yeah, I'm still waiting for a few comments to come through. Yeah, and I think you've nailed it in the context, ongoing monitoring. And I think, very soon we're going to start talking using the language of living compliance. Yes, Amanda agrees. Lack of ongoing monitoring. Mostly, Julia says, mostly on weak compliance programs. So the overall program and framework I would think he was referring to. Ongoing transaction monitoring. So the red flag would be the lack thereof.
Yeah.
Do we have any more comments coming through? Ineffective monitoring, lack of online real-time monitoring, sanction screening controls on both the outgoing transaction and the supporting documents must be in place. That's from Ezekiel. And then we have a theme of weak ongoing due diligence and weak sanction screening program.
Yeah, and this is often where it hurts for a lot of financial institutions. And it's something that you need to take into account in the design of your program, right? Where you sometimes will focus only on screening, primary relationship or counterparty, rather than, ownership structure or affiliates. I think there was comments about the lack of real-time or periodic rescreening of customer. This is more and more you have regulatory scrutiny. I've said it when this webinar started. You would see the OFAC list is sometimes updated 3 times in a single day. And so as a financial institution, if you're exposed to the US, whether it's the currency or your correspondent banking partners, this would then mean how often do you rescreen your database? Do you screen the delta, new clients or clients that have changes in the profile? Or do you take that approach that you simply want to screen everybody every time, right? And then screening is one thing, but then when all those alerts are generated, you also want to ensure that you have proper mechanism to review the alerts. And this is where you also need to spend time on how you sort of calibrate that sanction screening tool. If you put it so that you have alerts or very high alerts, your compliance officer going over and over and over, you might miss, some alerts because you've just been reviewing several false positives, right? So finding that balance on what's the appropriate threshold to generate an alert, what's the appropriate threshold to have some of those alert dispositioned by the system becomes really, it's an art on itself. And this reminds me of my early days in compliance when I was reviewing live SWIFT wire transfer. You definitely can become a bit blindsided if you keep seeing over and over those same alerts. The day that it's actually a true positive, you might miss it if you've been reviewing too many false positive. So that's one thing. Heavy reliance, obviously, on your correspondent bank as a financial control point. Again, I've said it, It's no longer an idea to say, I'm only responsible for this part of the process. I don't see what's doing in the downstream, or I'm going to rely on that final point to do the sanction check and let me know if something goes wrong, right? I've said it's a shared and accountability. It becomes really, really critical. And regulators will continue to emphasize on the expectation that institutions need to independently manage sanction risk and not just rely on the correspondent bank. And this is critical more and more in this payment landscape and borderless payment. And so key lesson here for me is that sanctions risk is often indirect, but it impacts directly the institution, right? Ongoing monitoring and not just onboarding screening is essential, right? And so it really highlights the importance of that screening from one end and then the relationship monitoring on the other end. And so with that said, what works, right? What does good compliance looks like? Successful institutions really take a risk-based, ecosystem-wide view. Zero risk does not exist. There's always risk on every type of transaction or business venture. But it's critical to invest in data analytics, on real-time monitoring tool, strengthen this third-party governance, and embed compliance early in product design. I think we're over. Sorry?
Sorry, Dr. Nduka, can you please mute your microphone? Thank you.
All right. So I want to spend 30 seconds in embedding compliance early in product design. I think this is critical, how we do it across the ecosystem and even for us at Visa. The last thing you want is to be designing that product with your marketing team, your sourcing team, your product team, have a beautiful branding prepared, only to have compliance come later and then stop and pause and say, I don't understand. Hard no until I understand what this product is trying to solve for. Who are we catering? So I think treating compliance as a strategic enabler, it's something that if you want to support sustainable growth rather than slowing down, it's something you must do, right? And so institutions more and more that succeed really view compliance as a part of the business strategy, not an afterthought. And it's especially important for banks on the continent here in Nigeria as we expand regionally and globally. And it's really a matter of breaking those silos where compliance is a tick the box exercise. We'll get to compliance when we get there, because if we tell them too early, we won't have the approvals in time. Let's wait until later, right? No, you actually have to do this the other way around. As you design the product, have compliance give you insights on where they might see some risks, and so that you can address them before you're at the last or the later part of your product design. What's the implication, right, for Nigeria, for the emerging markets? There's a unique opportunity for Nigeria to lead Africa by really embedding strong governance and really support innovation. Trust is what attracts investment and sustains growth. So fintech growth is a powerful driver for financial inclusion and economic participation. And it really expands access to digital payments and connect local customers and business to global market. But at the same time, that growth may increase cross-border exposure and fin crime and regulatory scrutiny and reputational impact. So for Nigeria, it creates both an opportunity, but also a responsibility, right? And so there's really a chance to leapfrog legacy system and build modern payment ecosystem. And this is, however, only done if those systems are anchored in strong governance or credible compliance framework. And so to me, this is a real importance in seeing the work that is being done by the Compliance Institute to really set the stone on what strong governance and compliance framework look like, right? And equally important is capacity building, what we're doing today, knowledge sharing, business models, they evolve. Compliance capabilities must evolve with them. And this is across your people, across your data, your technology, and your decision-making structure. And so for me, the core message here is growth, inclusion, integrity is not just competing goals, is really what makes growth sustainable, and positioning the country to lead by building a future-ready compliance framework. And so I'll close by really emphasizing that trust underpins every successful payment system. Strong compliance is what allows innovation to scale sustainably, both here in Nigeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, and globally. Borderless payment will require borderless thinking. Again, we're no longer at the time where you can hold a payment for 24 hours because you're doing a CDD that is relying on paper-based information, right? It requires borderless thinking. It requires, on the second, regulatory convergence is accelerating. So this means that it becomes critical, and trust is really the currency of global payments. We all have a role to play in this ecosystem, whether you're a payment scheme, a PSP, a bank, a fintech, right? And institutions that are able to anticipate the risk, that invest in governance, or that build that regulatory trust will be the best position to succeed. And again, obviously, compliance will remain a strategic capability, and it really becomes on all of us as compliance practitioner to really sell ourselves to our business team that we enable. I always say that with the team at Visa, the ones that know me I've met in my professional capacity, I always say that I'm here for the business. If I stop the business, I'm going to be jobless. And so my role is, how do I support the business to make it sustainable, enable the growth, while maintaining the safety of our ecosystem. So thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to the questions. I hope we're doing okay with the time, Danica, and welcoming any questions or feedback in the chat.
We have plenty of time. Yeah, we have more than enough time. Aram, let me say thank you for that. That was incredibly insightful. You dropped so many gems. I just want to recap some of them. I loved what you said about speed without governance creates systemic risk. That's not really something we've coined right now. And I think that's a very important point of departure. Something else I want to touch on, because maybe this is a pain point for me, because we do treat fraud and AML separately. And I think it's just an irritation for me, but don't come for me, fraud practitioners. The only reason I say that is because fraud is a predicate crime for financial crime. So for me, they weren't in the same. But treating them under the same umbrella, very important. So could not agree with you more there. And I think what you really alluded to, which was very critical for me, is that we are in the age of living risk, living controls. And what I always say is legislation tells us what? Risks enforce policy. The risks that exist in our society, in our economies, will enforce the policy decisions that are made at your government and supervisory levels. And that will define the what. Here with compliance and amongst our colleagues and as compliance practitioners, we are concerned with the how. And that then brings me to my question. Because I think the enlightening but scary thing that you said tonight was automation is not negotiable. And I think that is so relevant because the risk is undeniable now. If we are talking about the speed, if we are talking about the cross-border implications, that risk cannot be justified with manual controls anymore. However,
Nope.
I have to play a little bit of devil's advocate. When we talk automation, when we talk technology, it is an expensive exercise. And this balancing, and I think your last point that you just said is very important. We work for the business. Compliance is not meant to be the blocker. We are meant to be the enabler. But when we talk about technology and we talk about automation and operationalizing these sophisticated controls that we need to prevent these risks, that balancing exercise between costs and commercial benefit does becomes a bit challenging because, compliance doesn't make any money for the business. And then when you're dealing with false positive ratios, because it was so important what you said about that. We've had reports here talk about close to 90 to 95% of alerts generated through automatic transaction monitoring solutions and watchlist screening solutions are false positives. And we were at a time, and we're moving away from that now, where they would be dedicated resources appointed for that alert management. And you would have these massive teams of 500 to 600 alert investigators. So my question on that part is, how do we then do this balancing act? Because it almost sounds like for AML technology, and this is my personal position, there needs to be a separate but parallel framework of principles, methodology, and expectations on how do you decide which technology, is the technology fit for purpose? So just to get your thoughts around that.
Yeah. And you're spot on, Danica. And this is a full-time job for someone or for a team, right? Because that balance, there's no one size fits all. And there's no, clear indication, whether it's from a regulatory body or FATF or whatnot, to say you should set your alert rates at 80, 75, 72%. You should screen this way or that way, right? It really becomes, and to me, this is where you see the power of enterprise risk management framework and how you apply it. Because if you understand the context, you identify the players, that must come into the table to discuss those risks. Identify what are the risks, what is the impact, right? What's the impact and the probability of that risk to materialize? And if it does materialize, what's the impact? Is it financial? Is it reputation? And then what is my response to that risk? This is exactly what you need to put in place for that automation that you want to do for compliance. No one will come and tell you, this is the recipe and do it. You will always get a good cake or a good meal, right? But it's really what that recipe look like for your own financial institution. And you do some testing, right? And I've done that a lot in a previous life, right? Where you do all of this work, you determine that 75% looks like a good ratio to generate alerts. And so below that, it's fully automated. Above that, the alerts will require manual intervention and review. But you calibrate your system. And it's really, how do you calibrate your system and how often do you do that? So that you're able to test and say, yes, 75% looks good because my rate of false positive is low. I'm able to review the alerts and not have my queue bursting with 2,000 alerts per day, etc. One important thing you mentioned is that compliance will then require these massive teams, etc. But I think one key opportunity that we have is how do we use and we leverage AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning, or to ensure that they can uplift our program or uplift our tools to reduce that rate of false positive, reduce the amount of alerts you need to review, and obviously reduce the amount of staff that you need. And this is to say that you've said it, compliance, and I don't quite agree. You said compliance doesn't bring money. Actually, it does. Compliance brings money to the financial institution because it helps prevent financial penalties, right? And that's where that cost saving, you need to put that for your business rather to say that it's a cost center. So it's a balancing act, leveraging AI in some instances, and calibrate your system, right? You may start at 70% and realize that this does not look good. You go up or you go down. And so you allow that in your model to recalibrate as you want to make sure that the output is manageable and you are satisfied in your level of responses to the risks that are being identified.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, definitely I have to agree. That was just me being a little snippy. Because that's generally what we get in respect of. But we definitely, yeah, we definitely cost saving. But I can't add the cost generating to the budget, unfortunately. But thank you for that. And I think, you touched on AI a little bit, and we're seeing that shift now from a technology point of view, where we are having this layered application of AI on top of our ATMS and watchlist monitoring that is filtering down the false positives. And I think that is going to be incredible technology that's going to help us in terms of the speedy, faster processing of alert generation. So I'm going to just jump very quickly to some of the questions in the comments, and then I'm going to open it to the panelists. Okay. What's your advice for aspiring MLROs in the UK payments regulatory space? That's from Irio.
My advice to who? An MLRO in the UK that is wanting to?
In the payments regulatory space.
Okay. I suppose this will apply either if you're UK MLRO or somewhere on the continent. Obviously, number one, you want to keep abreast of what's happening in your world. And what I mean by that, in the beginning of this webinar, we said how the globe is more and more interconnected. So while you want to keep abreast of what's happening in the UK or in Europe, you also want to know what's happening around the world, especially where, as a financial institution or the structure you work at, you may have dealings in Asia. You may have dealings in the Middle East or in Africa. So you both need to keep abreast of what's happening in the UK, but definitely on what's happening in the continent, or let's say in Africa where you deal. And I think more and more what we are observing is, and I mentioned it earlier in the presentation, global or FATF standard will apply across the globe, right? Whether you are in Lagos or you go to Montreal in Canada, how you apply those FATF recommendation will be quite similar. But then you have to have that part of localization. So ensuring that you keep abreast of what's happening elsewhere in the world is definitely key, because it can also serve a learning, right? And learning goes both ways, right? It's not just from the Western world into Africa, but it's also from Africa to the Western world.
Definitely agreed. We have another question from Amadou. As a fraud analyst at a financial institution, can I or my employer, a fintech startup, report a customer to law enforcement for repeatedly carrying out fraudulent transactions on the platform? I assume this is in addition to their normal suspicious transaction reporting.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that in addition to your normal regulatory obligations to go above and beyond and report further to law enforcement directly?
Yeah. So really, to me, it really depends on what's the approach your financial institution is taking, right? I think most sort of AML or governance policy will always have a section on how do we communicate with law enforcement, what level of details that we share with law enforcement. And this, I'm speaking, purely from, dealings with law enforcement outside of any SDR, suspicious activity report, or suspicious transaction report that your FinCrime or compliance team are already filing to your NFIU. So I suppose the first point of referral for a fraud analyst is to really go back to that policy, that in-house policy that most probably already speak to law enforcement communication and information sharing, validating internally who is responsible for doing those communication to law enforcement and at what level you have that communication. But one thing is important. We said how fraud and AML and compliance, sometimes they overlap. So you may have flagged a suspicious activity from a fraud perspective, but pass that to your compliance team if they haven't already had alerts on that gentleman or the activity you detected. So definitely share it internally with your FinCrime team, and perhaps the activity has already been picked up and reported to the appropriate level. So this is where it's really critical not to work in silo. If something does not make sense to you, take the actions, check your policy, who's the policy owner, who's internally responsible for law enforcement communication, while you also in parallel work with your compliance team to have them do an enhanced due diligence on that account.
No, agreed. And depending on your volumes, I would always prioritize the highest risk list. Okay, we have a great question from
approach.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that one, Naram. We have a great question from Karabari BC. Please forgive me if my pronunciations are butchering it. And the question is, what governance frameworks should financial institutions implement to ensure transparency and explainability of AI models used in transaction monitoring in terms of data governance?
Yeah, and this is exactly where I was mentioning that it's no longer for regulators to tell them, yes, I have a transaction monitoring tool and it's called ABCD. And it's rather, I have a transaction monitoring tool. This is what my tool is able to do. And this is the reason why I have configured my tool a certain way. So in terms of governance, for me, all those compliance process, I call it a model. You have a model for sanction screening, you have a model for transaction monitoring, and your model have different feature. But it always starts with, what is the model trying to achieve? What's the content of that model? What are the different rules that you've put, and why did you put those rules in place, those business rules to generate those alerts? And so to me, this is the way you can clearly articulate to a regulator, why are you using a certain tool and the capability of those tools and how you configured it. These are the reason why you've set a threshold at a certain level. This is the reason why you've decided to screen 5 regulatory lists and not the entire population of lists available across the world. And so what I'm trying to say here is that governance is your model, and you being accountable and owning that model, meaning that you are able to defend it and explain it, and not just say, I want to do transaction monitoring. I put an RFI out there. I received 4 or 7 suppliers. They've all bidded, provided documentation. It looked good. We approved it, and we just configured the plain vanilla. And you're unable to explain some of those rules. And that is where most of the time financial institution will get hit, because they're unable to explain what the model does without relying on the vendor for information.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And then to build on that, we have the question that says, what is your advice on total dependence on AI compliance without human oversight?
So I love AI. I love AI tool. I don't think AI will completely replace a human being. And this is me in my little word. And even if you tell me you will have the best machine learning in place and train your AI tool or whatnot to really think like a human being, it remains that there are elements only a trained compliance officer will bring. And this is the value that we bring. And so for us, compliance, it's really that value proposition. What more can a RAM bring to that mix that a tool cannot do? The tool will help you go through, an immense database, filter or screen an immense amount of transactions, spot suspicious activity based on those rules you put in place. But then the analysis and connecting the dots, this is where the value that your compliance officer will bring in place. So I'm not of the opinion that AI will fully replace compliance officer. Rather, to me, AI is here to enable a compliance officer to do its job faster, smarter. I think long is the time where monitoring, you use Excel to extract database, and then you do VLOOKUP, and then you do pivot table to identify certain trends, and then based on that, you then analyze. No, this AI can do it for you, give you the output, and you take it to the next level. So AI is a companion to your compliance officer. To me, AI is not replacing the compliance officer, but keen on hearing more. Danica, what's your point on this question?
So don't come for me on this one, but I believe that everything that I can do as a compliance officer in terms of assurance planning, monitoring, checks, checklists, frameworks, I can train an AI to do. It may not be now, it may not be within 3 years or 5 years, but you can eventually train the AI. And if we talk about predictive controls and predictive analysis, human eyes cannot do that. I need a team of people. I need to have various stakeholders from various industries and government institutions and prosecuting authorities and law enforcement authorities and investigative authorities to curate that knowledge and bring it together. AI would do that without me. I do think that there will definitely be a hybrid model, but it will slowly taper off later on. Checks and balances is what we build our foundation on as compliance officers. So I don't see it being completely independent on its own. But there was something very interesting my director said today, and he said, you need to get the people that are going to use AI to extract the greatest value out of it, that would use their own critical thinking to develop solutions out of AI. And that person would replace 200 resources, because they would be able to do, using AI, the various roles. Now, I know in AML, we've probably worn 5 hats already. So we've already learned how to multitask that role and juggle risks and compliance controls and reporting obligations all at once. So being able to take that knowledge and build it into AI to benefit our objectives in our role, I do think is the trajectory we should move towards as compliance officers. The tools are there. Let's use it to the best of our ability to achieve our objectives in a quicker, faster, more efficient, resource-saving type of way. So that's my view on it. I do see that there's going to be there is currently a huge increase in AI technology and embedded AI technology so we call it ATMS, Automated Transaction Monitoring Solutions, which is different from watchlist screening. Because I think when we talk about AML technology, we talk about it in one term, but AML technology can be so many different modular technologies that do different things against the AML ecosystem. You can have KYC solutions, verification solutions, you can have screening solutions and transaction monitoring solutions and risk classification solutions. So what does your technology do? Does it incorporate all of these processes and procedures, or is it just modular? And your frameworks for monitoring and assurance should be in accordance with what the solution is actually doing for you. And then AI would exist over and above that product offering, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and this, to me, it's unique for each financial institution to determine, right? For one, it might be, I only want AI to support in a very narrow type of activity, or I want a global or integrated tool that will look at all my processes from KYC to monitoring to STR filing. But this is something that each and unique the financial institution are able to set what good looks like, right? And how are we comfortable with AI? Some today are completely, I won't say risk averse on AI, but have some reservation and might not use it intensively. And what I want to illustrate as well, if we look at COVID, right? 2020, 2021, I was in trade finance, doing compliance for trade finance for a financial institution. And whoever is who's knowledgeable on trade finance, letter of credit, standby letter of guarantee, etc., they will know that it's a highly manual and paper intensive activity, right? Around the world, we really rely on paper. But then guess what do you do when COVID hits and then you have orders from your government saying that you cannot go or enter in the office, you cannot be outside past a certain time, etc. You need to social distance and whatnot. Yet you need to review documents that are paper, meaning that they've been physically shipped to your office. And so it was a really interesting journey to see how, because of a unique situation, pandemic, that I think even in the best business continuity program or plan, we have probably never thought of a pandemic of that nature that makes you fundamentally change your process rapidly, because it's a situation where you need to find a solution today, not in 3 months, not in 2 months, right? So how do you bring a bit of automation, a bit of using your tools to do the review of those documents that you used to check paper because you wanted to ensure that they were authentic, but now you have to rely on tools, right? And so it's just to illustrate that it's the same thing for AI. It's there. It's just a question of how do we embrace it and at what level are we comfortable to do so.
Okay, we do have a few more questions, and I'm just going to ask Bao if it's okay if we can take some of these offline, because they are centered around AI, and I do think that this requires a little bit more application and insight before we could publish something to share on that. But we do have 8 minutes left, and I just wanna thank Param again for this very insightful, important discussion, and I think it's important that you brought up COVID, because COVID was a pivotal moment in the global economy and a shift in payments. And I feel like we are there right now. What is happening in the world right now in terms of the conflict in the Middle East could have catastrophic implications. And our ability to be innovative and adapt and ensure that we can meet these demands for rapid payments could really shape the way our countries move into this new economic era. So thank you. Thank you for bringing this topic to our attention. Let's keep talking about it. Let's keep sharing ideas. And for those of the participants that wanted to know about AI tools and technology in this space, I think, Bao, that is a whole different discussion on its own. And I'd really like to have the opportunity to take it offline. I do want to just raise with the participants, in terms of regulating AML technology, the South African Financial Intelligence Center already has a directive out that is applicable in South Africa, and it's called Directive 5 and PCC 45, so it's Public Compliance Communication 45. And it's basically setting the standards that you need to have in place here in South Africa for it. I'm going to share that link with you guys. If you are interested, you're more than welcome to have a look at it and maybe just be a bit forward thinking on what regulation may come in your respective jurisdictions around our risks associated with technology, because they go hand in hand. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Aram. It has been an absolute pleasure and honor. And thank you, Bao, for having this great discussion.
Thank you so much, Dineka. Aram, thank you so much. Please, can we show some love? Let's have some reactions online to appreciate our speaker and our moderator. And like I said at the beginning of this conversation, that we are celebrating our women in compliance.
Connected.
We are celebrating our women, powerful women in compliance, intelligent, brilliant, and I'm sure you all agree with me that they delivered on this. So I want to say a very big thank you to you all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And to all our participants joining us from different parts of the world, thank you for spending this time with us. I would say conversations like this actually remind us that compliance is no longer
Aram, is it me that froze or is it Bao?
No, I wasn't sure if it was just me, but I think I've lost you guys for a good 30 seconds now.
Okay,
Yes.
I think that's technology's way to say let's call it a night. Bao, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in Johannesburg. Please give me a shout. I have shared your LinkedIn profile with the participants. Please, if you want to reach out to Aram, her link is there. I'll share mine as well. Bao, are you back? We lost you for a minute.
Thank you so much.
Back to you.
I was expecting Mr. Lukaya would have taken that up. Thank you. Sorry about the network issues. I just went off. So I was saying thank you to everyone. And on behalf of the Compliance Institute, on behalf of the board and directors of the Institute, I want to say a very big thank you to Aram. Dineka, thank you so much. And to our participants, thank you very much. For members of the Compliance Institute Nigeria, who want to have access to the recordings and to the slides, yes, you can have access to it. If you're financially up to date with the Institute, you're meant to pay your subscription. So if you've done so, just log into your portal on the website and you'll be able to access today's webinars. For those who are not members of the Institute, please go on the website and please register as a member of the Compliance Institute Nigeria so that you can enjoy most of this conversation. And because we understand perfectly well that we are partnering with an international body, IFCA, the slides will also, and the recordings will be shared with IFCA so that they can also pass it across to members globally. With permission of Aram, are we free to do that? Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So thank you very much, everyone. My name is Bawa Egbakume, and it has been truly my pleasure on behalf of the board and of the Institute to host you at today's webinar. So I would like to extend my sincere appreciation again to all the participants and to all compliance professionals on this call. Thank you for the work you do every day to uphold integrity globally, to strengthen governance and to protect the financial system. And I would not forget to say a very special thank you again to our outstanding women in compliance, our speaker and our moderator for today. Thank you so much. And happy International Women's Day to everyone. I have my director who is also a woman here, Mrs. Emisi Olukoya. You want to say something?
Good evening. Thank you very much. We cannot thank you enough, Arame and also Denica. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation. Global payments compliance in the borderless economy. Thank you for all the topics. As we close, we say thank you and hopefully see you in Johannesburg very soon, as you have prophesied. Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
True pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you again. In 2 weeks' time, we have another webinar. And should I bring more women to show off the women in compliance again?
Always.
Okay, so work on that. And thank you very much, Aram. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bob. Have a great
We
evening.
also have Father's Day. Remember to do Father's Day for us.
We always celebrate our men. We always celebrate our men. I'm sure the men are not jealous. But it's just International Women's Day.